Hey, welcome back to my channel. My name's Trevor. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the books that I read in August. And I only read about 9 books, or only completed about 9, air quotes. Uh, I say that because there's one book on my list that I didn't finish, but I'm going to include it anyway because why not? So, let's talk a little bit about what I read that I got from the local library because libraries are our friends, those of us who like to read a lot. And I got a few really good books from the library up here locally, and I'd like to talk about them. I don't have the physical copies anymore, so I just have a nice little cheat sheet here to tell you about. Uh, so the first one that I read was called Cue the Sun, and it is by Emily Nussbaum. It's about the history of the reality TV genre. Now, reality TV is, of course, the genre that gave us a lot of really good TV over the years, but also gave us a lot of junk. And it's not exactly the most revered or loved genre for a lot of people. A lot of people who really love TV, but it did give us some great things over the years. It, of course, also helped inspire the faux documentary style of the shows like The Office and Parks and Recreation, among others. And I really kind of went into this with I really went into the book being like, am I going to enjoy this? Because while I like reality TV, back when I had TV and I used to watch it, I don't have TV anymore. I just watch stuff on YouTube or whatever. Uh, I don't know that I respected it or liked it a lot, but I really enjoyed this book a lot. I think I read her previous book called I Like to Watch about like prestige TV in the era of like The Sopranos and things like that. And so for her to apply that same sort of analytical skills and breaking down of like the reality TV genre and how it's not like documentary, and why it's different, and why yes there are questions to be asked about the authenticity, I guess is a good way to put it. uh Certainly it's not scripted, but there are like situations involved and facilitated by the producers who are really the ones that drive the genre. Usually in a Hollywood, it's like directors or actors, or drive a genre, or have the power behind the scenes. And in this case, it's actually the producers of reality TV who are the premier people necessarily. So I really enjoyed that. Uh, the one that I read from the library that I would say was probably the best book I read in August is a little thing called "The Future Was Now" by Chris Nashawati. My apologies if I mispronounced his name. He had previously written a book all about the making of Caddyshack, and that's one film. But like, he had the space to make this really good book about Caddyshack, and in this one, he is tackling the summer of 1982. That is the summer that gave us movies like E.T., Blade Runner, John Carpenter's The Thing, Tron, Conan the Barbarian, what else? Poltergeist, Star Trek: Wrath of Khan, couple others. And he doesn't go into like deep detail with each film because it's relatively short book, but he gets just enough of the behind the scenes stories, and especially focusing on how when both Blade Runner and The Thing came out on, I believe it was June 25th, 1982, like how they both did poorly in the box office, but they're now, of course, considered classics of cinema, and rightfully so, by the way. And I really enjoyed the book. Like, I got it from the library, I want to say on a Friday night, because wow, Friday nights for me. Started that night, read a good chunk of it the next Saturday. Kind of had to stop myself from finishing it on Saturday, and then turned around, finished it the following Sunday morning, and really just incredibly fun book to read. I really enjoyed it. I think I would really recommend it to anyone who likes to read about movies, the history of movies, especially science fiction movies, especially how really because a big point of the film, or excuse me, of the book, is that Star Wars changed everything. Star Wars, of course, came out in 1977, about 5 years prior, and just all the cycles of changing and how science fiction went from being like obviously a man in a rubber suit chasing people to like, you know, chest bursting aliens and things like this, and talks a little bit about the original Alien, of course, because Ridley Scott was the director of that, and he went on to do Blade Runner and things like just interesting behind the scenes stories from the films. And again, I wish it had been longer. I wish it had been more in depth in certain ways, but for its purpose of highlighting just how special the summer of 1982 was in terms of film, it's really, really good. Damn good. I loved it a lot, and I highly recommend it. Another book I got from the library was actually a book that I think I had at one point, and specifically its edition, but I think I donated it to the library because I was like, I'm never going to get around to reading this. And then, ironically, I did. It's called Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. And I plan to do, maybe a little later down the line, kind of a video about Joan Didion and Eve Babbitt's and sort of the ways in which they both wrote about America, specifically California, in the end of the 1960s, and sort of the death of the dream of America that was sort of born during that time and things like that. I really enjoyed this book. It's more a collection of essays than the one that I read last month by Didion called The White Album, which is also essays, but they're more interconnected. But yeah, I really love this one. And again, I'm 95% sure this particular copy that I had from the library was one that I had bought a little while, maybe 10 years ago, and then donated. Not a big deal if I didn't, but And then the last library book was Hip Hop is History by Questlove. And Questlove, of course, is the drummer for The Roots, who are also the band for Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. You know, good money if you can make it, I guess. I don't know. I don't particularly care for Jimmy Fallon, but Questlove is a great author, and I like this book. I didn't love it as much as I did his previous book. I think it came out a couple years ago called Music is History, but it's kind of the same thing. It's sort of going through, in this case, the history of hip hop and how it relates to the wider culture of America from roughly 1979, which is the year I was born. So yay, me and hip hop. To last year, and it covers like a lot of the things that happened, like the sort of the birth of the genre, how it went from being party music to being like socially relevant and depicting how life is for Black Americans in a country where they are not valued. They are not. And depicting sort of the rise of hip hop and how it became just the dominant musical form in the world. And of course, there was, Biggie and Tupac, and then, just the various rappers that came up around that era and since then and such. And it was very good. I really enjoyed it. I liked Music as History better overall. But Questlove is one of the best music writers around right now. Not to mention a very good musician, I'm led to believe. So, and a good follow on Twitter as well. So, yeah, those are the books that I read from the library. And now we're going to get to the stuff that I own a physical copy of and have right in front of me. And now let's look at some of them. This is, of course, Henry V, Part 1. Or, excuse me, Henry IV, Part 1. I wonder how many times I'll say that by mistake in this video. But Henry IV, Part 1. And I love Shakespeare. I do. I love to read Shakespeare. I have rarely seen like a few productions like on stage. I've seen some of the movies, of course, but Shakespeare is, he's Shakespeare. What else can I say? But of course, there is the sort of school of thought that Shakespeare didn't write his actual plays. And I've always found that as someone from a small town who reads a lot, has educated himself a lot, I always found that kind of insulting. So, I, if I can get on my soapbox for a minute, I think Shakespeare was Shakespeare, and I think Shakespeare wrote some really good plays. And Henry IV, Part One, is a really good one. And of course, this is one of those plays where the most interesting character is not the title character. The two most interesting characters are Prince Hal, who is Henry IV's son, of the future Henry V, who would go on, of course, to win at Agincourt and be just one of the like premier examples of English royalty. If you care about such things, I personally don't, but And then Sir John Falstaff, who is maybe one of the best characters, if not the best, that Shakespeare ever wrote. And I think the interplay between Hal and Falstaff, the way that Falstaff is trying to be like a father figure to Hal while leading him into some really questionable, borderline, well, not borderline, actively criminal activities. And Prince Hal kind of gets the one up on him quite a bit because Hal's like smarter, but he's also aware that someday he's going to be king. Cue the Lion King, just can't wait to be king song, which, yeah, that's basically what it is. But he's going to have his fun beforehand. And Henry IV is frustrated, as any father would be whenever their child is like just off doing whatever. And so there's that central conflict. And of course, there's the other conflict where Henry IV, who is a usurper himself, uh, is being threatened by people who want to take the throne away from him. And so there is that conflict where Prince Hal's exact double, Hotspur, is one of the people who is trying to, get rid of Henry IV so that somebody else can be in charge of England. And there's that tension there. It's a really good play. Like I said, I've read it before, and at the time that I bought this, I thought that I'd bought part two as well. However, I should have been paying more attention whenever I was buying these books because, as it turns out, I bought Henry VI Part 2, not Henry IV Part 2. I've never read Henry VI Part 1, so yeah. Don't know what I'm going to do about that. But that's alright. That happens. But yes, Henry IV Part 1, very good Shakespeare play. One of the history plays, so it's maybe, depends on your taste, but I enjoyed it. Now to a book that I used to love. I used to really love this book when I was a teenager, back in the 90s. I also really loved Oasis when I was a teenager. So it's almost timely that I reread this book, or most of it, during or in the lead up to Oasis getting reunited. And that is Henry David Thoreau's Walden and Sybil Despense, which I actually didn't reread this time. I've had to read Sybil Despense for a bunch of classes over the years, so I feel like I know it pretty well. But Walden, the simple story, as someone on Goodreads put it, the simple story of a man who was brave enough to live in his parents' backyard. I don't think I can put it any better than that. I'm going to try, though. Now, again, I loved this book when I was a teenager because it seemed to suggest that you could throw off all the cares of the world and live simply. That's his mantra throughout the book. Live simply. Apparently, living simply also includes going into town and getting your mom to do your laundry for you. Yeah. That's kind of the big reveal whenever I read a book. I cannot remember the name of it. It's been so long, but somewhere in the interim between the first time I read Walden and this time, a book that sort of highlighted how pretentious Thoreau is. Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he was wrong to want to live simply in the woods. It just means that he might have been full of it, as far as that goes. Now, the part that kind of made me decide to give up, other than the fact that the writing is not as good as I remember it, but he kind of goes on about this story of an Irish immigrant family that he meets, and the father's struggling to feed his children. He's working a bunch at his job, and he's struggling to feed his children. And Henry David Thoreau is like, "Why don't you just quit your job and like pick berries with your family?" Just I'm just gonna let that linger for a minute. Yeah, I don't know. I think I've rarely read anything as tone deaf as that. And the thing is, Thoreau thinks it's the best advice in the world. Of course, Thoreau was privileged enough to come from relatively decent family in terms of their status in town, and he probably had to work a little bit, but he was not broke by any stretch of the imagination. Here he is. He's offering this advice to these poor immigrants, these poor people. That's kind of where he lost me, honestly. I read for a couple more pages and I was like, no, sorry, life's too short. So, yes, I count it as being a book that I finished this month, but did I really? No, but I read it in high school, so that counts. Now we move on to the only novel that I finished this month, which is kind of interesting because I have tried this year to read more fiction, past couple years really. And this one is probably one of the best books that I've read this month or this year. But it's not one of the best by this particular author. Now, I'm going to do a separate video at some point about William Faulkner because Faulkner is an author that at one point I read a few of his works and really liked them, but kind of got off the Faulkner train, as it were. And I really enjoyed picking up Faulkner books last year, starting with Sanctuary, moving on to Light in August, and this year I've read Absalom, Sound and Fury. Like I've read a lot of Faulkner here lately, but this one is his last novel. It is called The Reivers. It is the story. It's much less Faulknerian than his other work. Here, let me get this in the camera. There we go. Actually, no, it's good. But it's very much it's a simple story for Faulkner is saying a lot because Faulkner is kind of very much stream conscious. Multiple narrators, multiple points of view, crazy things going on, weird stuff, freighted, loaded with like social and racial tensions in the South in the 20th century and such. This one doesn't really have a lot of. It's more gentle, I would say. It is the story told in retrospect of these three guys. One of them is like a teenage boy or almost preteen boy going to Memphis in the car that the kid's grandfather owns. One of the people going is the hired man of, I think he's the hired man of the family, or he works for them anyway. And then the other one is someone who works in town in this, in Jefferson, the fictional county seat of the fictional county of Yoknapatawpha, which Faulkner created, of course, in northern Mississippi. But they go on a road trip to Memphis, and things unwind from there in a way that is a lot of fun to read, actually. Which you can't always say about Faulkner. Like, you can't always say this book is fun to read because when William Faulkner, because it's freighted with, like I said, a lot of issues and stuff, and those come up in this book, but it's not as weighty. It's not as heavy. I actually laughed out loud a couple of times in the book. It's really good. Uh, is it one of his masterpieces? No, it's pretty good. It's almost like if you didn't know that Faulkner wrote it, you might think it was really, really good. Like possibly one of the best novels of a Southern fiction writer. But because it's Faulkner, there's The Sound and the Fury, there's Absalom. Absalom, which is his masterpiece, by the way. My personal favorite, Light in August. I'll get more into Faulkner at a later point, but The Reivers is it's pretty good. I enjoyed it a lot, and it does have that white versus black kind of class or clash of cultures in Ned Hagenbeck versus who's it? Not Ike McCaslin, Ned McCaslin, or excuse me, Boone Hagenbeck. Boone versus Ned, and sort of their uneasy alliance, uneasy friendship kind of thing. And there's a lot that goes on. It's. I don't want to spoil it. It's quite good. I enjoyed it a lot. It was probably the most enjoyable book that I read last month. I enjoyed it a lot. And now we have An American Childhood by Annie Dillard, which I started it and I was kind of like not really feeling it. Like I enjoyed it, but I was like, I might DNF this one. I DNF'd a couple of books last month, and this one I was close to DNFing it. And then I got to the part where she's telling the story as a child growing up in Pittsburgh in the 1950s, seeing this weird light come across her bedroom walls every time at night and just wondering what it is. And I'm not going to ruin what the solution to that mystery is, but when I read the solution, I was like, yep, this is a book for me. I really enjoyed it. It's kind of reminiscing about her childhood, obviously, an American childhood in Pittsburgh in the 1950s and 60s, and it's quite good. I enjoy. There's a sort of episodic quality to it. It's not strictly like well, it's chronological, but it's not strictly like and then in this year this happened, and then this. It's kind of a little all over the place, like in the way that a good memoir should be, I think. And I quite enjoyed it a lot. I finished it close to the start of the month, though, so I'm not. My memories are not quite as fresh with it as far as what I liked about, what I recommended, things like that. But it's pretty good. I enjoyed it a lot. And then of the books that I own, this was probably the best one. It is called Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of the Hip Hop Generation by Jeff Chang. And as I said earlier, like another book that I read this month was concerned with hip hop. This is a much more of a uh, history of the generations around hip hop and how the music is part of the culture that came out of a lot of it in not necessarily inner cities, yes, but also uh, Public Enemy, for instance, came from Long Island. Various different locales helped to birth hip hop, helped to birth hip hop, helped to birth things tangentially related to hip hop or very much related to hip hop, like graffiti art, breakdancing, fashion. The way that fashion changed because of hip hop. It's very good. It's not all the way just about the music. I mean, the music does obviously play a part in the story, but it's much more of a social history of the marginalized communities in America, and it's quite good. I really liked it. It was a good one to end the month though. I really enjoyed it a lot. and I would highly recommend. I think I enjoyed it a lot more than I did Hip Hop Is History by Questlove, even though I still liked that one a lot. This one was this would be like maybe I would recommend this as like maybe not necessarily textbook in a hip hop class if there was, but it would be required reading. I think it's really good. I really enjoyed it a lot. So that is my wrap up for August, and I don't have a to be read list for September. I have some books that I'm reading right now. But I'm just going to wrap it up and say thank you for those of you that watched, and I will see you next time. Maybe with a video on Saturday. I don't know what it's going to be about yet. It might be about Faulkner. It might be about Joe Didion and Heath Babbitts. I don't know. I'm just playing this. I'm just seeing where it goes. So we'll see what I think of next Saturday. So thank you.